first, let's start with what did we do yesterday. So, yesterday I had the pleasure of presenting to a group of Pittsburgh area, I guess it's Western Pennsylvania, really. Western Pennsylvania critical infrastructure operators across multiple sectors, education, water. I don't even remember them all. If you were there, I'm sorry, but there were a great cross-section of people there. And we talked a little bit, we shared some information about how we work together to build a capability to protect what we saw as a particularly serious security issue to protect our Active Directory configurations within the IT systems. So in regards to specific actors like ALF-V and others, their end goal is facilitated by their access to Active Directory. So you can assess their tactics and techniques and see that a lot of what they do starts after initial access. It starts with golden ticket attacks, silver ticket attacks, Kerberos attacks, DC sync attacks, right? And once they are able to perpetrate those attacks and escalate their privileges, then they're free to do their dirty deeds inside of your infrastructure. So we work together to assess that and understand exactly what is it that we're trying to build a capability to protect against. There was, I think when we assessed the ALF-V stuff, there was close to 12 to 15 different TTPs. Yep. That's too much. I don't have enough budget to address every one of those TTPs. So let's skip all that and go to the end. What did all those TTPs have in common? What did the attacks have in common?
What was the output?
Right. And so ultimately it ended up being they wanted access to credentials inside of Active Directory. So how do we protect Active Directory? That became the question, right? And so what we really came up with is, the approach to be secure is implement best practices, right? And defensible architectures, right? And so maybe we have to re-engineer the way our Active Directory is configured and how it's physically connected to the networks, but implement the Microsoft best practices around protected AD, read-only AD, ensure that you have these defensible architectures in place, and then develop additional capabilities, for instance, to protect the data if all of your controls fail.
Yes.
And that's kind of the key thing for this situation is we depend on our hygiene so much, but company after company gets toppled by ALF-V, Black Cat, and others because they simply put their hygiene in place and think that's the best we can do. We're going to rely upon that. Our stance is we have to be more operationally secure than that. We can't just depend on our hygiene. We have to develop capabilities that allow us to have a defensive advantage. Mm-hmm. And so for this particular instance, that defensive advantage comes in the form of exfiltration disruption. Mm-hmm. So the idea is that even if all your controls fail, even if your hygiene is bypassed, when they try to exfiltrate your ntds.dit file, that you make it so that file is useless for them when they exfiltrate it.
Yeah.
Otherwise, they have to live off the land. They have to bring in Mimikatz and Hashcat and do all these things on your infrastructure to crack the passwords, to perpetrate the pass the hash attacks and all those things, which gives your defenders an opportunity to detect them. Okay. So the best of the best are going to exfiltrate that stuff in an environment that's pretty well monitored. They're going to exfiltrate it through a known communications channel. They're going to offline attack it, and then they're going to perpetrate those attacks on your infrastructure. They're not going to be silly enough to import all those tools onto your infrastructure and try to do all those operations on your infrastructure. And so, in my mind, and this example I think is a perfect example where we didn't try to address TTP this one or that one, mm-hmm. right? We said, what are they trying to do? They're trying to get the Active Directory credentials.
Yeah.
Okay, how do we prevent that?
Yeah.
That makes us a more robust organization in that we have developed a capability now, and we have this tool that we can use to, we can use Certes to protect data that we want to protect, whether it's moving from a legitimate point A to a legitimate point Z, or whether it's moving from our infrastructure at point A to the adversary's staging server at point Z.
Mm-hmm.
We can protect it in both those scenarios. We can protect it when it's legitimate access. We can protect it when it's not legitimate access. And that's a capability that we can employ in many different situations, not just to protect against exfiltration issues. Think about, okay, what capability does this fit into and how can we use it?
Yeah.
Not just how can we solve this one problem.
Yeah. Just for the benefit of the audience, the event we were referring to that Mike and I were at yesterday was a event for CISA, the Cybersecurity Infrastructure and Security Agency, a best practice information sharing forum essentially, and it had various areas of critical infrastructure in attendance, and the reason we were presenting this was, well, it seems that our view on Active Directory being a target also aligns to CISA's view, because they were talking about and identified that as being a key target in quite a few attacks. But one of the things I did observe yesterday, and I've seen this in general now at cybersecurity events and forums for critical infrastructure, was there seemed to be an increased presence of operators from water authorities, water boards there, and some of the UTC events I've seen an increased presence, and it seems to be becoming a bit of a topic, a hot topic. And of course, most recently, just locally in Pennsylvania, there was the breach at Al Qaipa, the water and sewage plant there. What are your thoughts on that? It seems to be, is it the next hot target, water? We haven't seen much of it in the news before, is it?
Right. Well, and I think one of the questions that we asked ourselves about the Colonial Pipeline thing is, will it happen again? And the answer is absolutely. Yeah. As long as critical infrastructure serves large segments of the population with critical services that are required to be on 24/7, we will be targeted. That's the nature of the threat. And so, I think electric utility has evolved with the regulations, and then we clearly see natural gas and the pipeline industry is on the same path. They're on the same trajectory that electric utility was early on, because essentially they fuel the nation, right? Literally, they provide the fuel for our entire nation. And water, which is clearly a very critical part of our infrastructure, is now following. They're being attacked. We're talking about what kind of regulations they might need, what kind of basic security initiatives have to happen there. And so, absolutely, I think you will see the water industry follow the pipeline, utility, all the critical infrastructures, and based on the cross section of individuals that we got to speak with yesterday. I got to shake hands with a few of them, get to know a couple of them. We talked for 5 or 10 minutes with a few of them, just about like what their needs are and what their operations look like. Clearly, they're having an awakening after that issue with the Israeli-made automation devices. Although it wasn't necessarily that damaging, it was a wake-up call, right? And so, if any bad thing happens, hopefully something good comes out of it. And I kept telling those individuals from the water utilities yesterday, I said, the budget's coming, don't worry. Like, right. You've had this thing in the media, the budget's on its way, and all they could say is, you really think so? I hope it is. I'm like, no, it's coming. So if you are an administrator at a water authority and you're listening to this, please get your security teams the budget, because I've promised it. I mean, clearly that's the one thing you needed to get you over the hump. But
otherwise, your CFO is going to get some requests from your promise.
Yeah, I don't. We have to pay closer attention to our infrastructure protection, and that includes water, hospitals, the U.S. federal government, state, local government, regional entities, and all the pipeline, electric utilities, all of that.
Now, one of the other observations from yesterday is there were various organisations. So we had government agencies, state police, we had different utilities there. You're obviously representing the electric utility. I don't think we had any from a gas utility, but it seems everyone's got their own regulations that they need to deal with, right? So we talked about security first, compliance second, obviously with electric next, the primary driver. Now with gas operators, it's the TSA directive is the current flavour of the month. I'm not sure the specifics the water boards have to deal with. I'm sure there's something which will being penciled in as we speak, but it seems like we are reinventing the wheel a lot of the time. Different governing bodies spending a lot of time on money, drafting a regulation which then has to be implemented. There's a lot of time scales, cycles burnt in those processes. What room is there for a different approach? Almost the one thing everyone has in common is the risks are still the same. We're talking about IT/OT environments, we're talking about sensitive data, Active Directory. At the end of the day, what the adversaries are going after is they want to get hold of sensitive information to either ransom it, or worse, even worse than that, a denial of service without the ransom, just doing the denial of service for other political gains. There's a lot of common denominators there, so why the variance in the regulatory frameworks? And I know it's not an easy answer to this, but what are the options?
Well, that's a very hard question, but timing is everything, and sometimes the catalyst is a bad thing. And I think when you look at the industries, almost every one of the catalysts for the electric utility was a bad event that had happened. The catalyst for gas is Colonial Pipeline. The catalyst for water may very well be this incident that happened in Pennsylvania.
Sure, yeah.
And so I think from the question of why now is, the bad thing happened, timing is everything, here we are. It's critical. But I think you're right about the cycles. We're spending a lot of cycles reinventing the wheel. And so I would just like to give some advice to the water utilities.
First,
right, yeah. Be secure first. Be compliant second. You have to be compliant, but prior to that, you have to be secure, because you can be secure and compliant, or you can be compliant but not necessarily secure. I think I know which choice you're all going to make. You want to be secure first and compliant.
Well, also, let's say a new directive is discussed tomorrow. Let's say the drafting has already started as we speak. Typically, it's going to be until that pen goes to paper and it's enforced. We're talking 2 years from now.
Yeah.
So a lot can happen in 2 years. So that's where the security first
absolutely
comes.
And so I would say learn from the electric utility industry. We're pretty mature in those regulations. Develop a electronic security perimeter, right? Around your OT systems. Yeah. Develop a security perimeter and re-architect your OT systems so that there is a boundary called, what we call in our industry, the electronic security perimeter, right? Create an active defense zone and a demilitarized zone so that you can then interact with the OT systems in a safe way that's still secure, right? And start thinking about separating. If you have an OT system that relies in any form or fashion on your IT, Active Directory, forest, or domain, get those things separated immediately. You should not have an OT system that has a domain that's inside of your IT forest. They should all be separate. Start doing that kind of work where you're building this defensible position for yourself. And then when the regs come, it's a pretty straightforward adaptation of your secure environment that you've already built for yourself. And I think if you can position that for your management, and I think if you can get their buy-in that, hey, we see regulation coming, we can be ahead of it and be secure, or we can be behind it and be compliant, I think there's a value proposition there that you can make that can help you achieve that buy-in. But start learning from us. Don't reinvent the wheel all over again. So again, network segmentation, security perimeters, secure remote access, our defensive architectures, and develop the capabilities you need to protect yourself, operate in manual mode, operate in a contested environment. There's a list of 10 things that you could be doing right now that is good for your operations, good for your security, and will position you in a way that when the regs come, you can make slight adaptations and still continue to operate and be secure and be compliant.
Perfect.